Hello, I'm so glad you're here today. In this episode, I want to talk about something that you are probably experiencing in your life right now, something that I call the gap to close. And the gap to close is this concept around making your current reality align with or look more like the reality that you want to be living in. It's about creating synchronicity between who you are on the inside and who you are on the outside. And this is a huge struggle for people, something that I've struggled with myself many, many times. And I think it deserves this conversation because you want to start to close the gap. When you do, you really start to feel this new level of fulfillment and peace and freedom in your life. So let me explain the gap to close a little bit more. So many times people will ask, how can I feel more satisfaction in my life? How do I feel more excited? How do I feel more inspired or fulfilled or joyful? How do I experience a little bit more fun in this whole thing we call life? I mean, you would be amazed how many people ask me this. It's a little scary how many people don't feel like they're really enjoying their life. And the simple answer that I give to them is, okay, there's a version of your life that you're living now. It's what is rooted in your current reality, your current circumstances, your current stressors, your current way of being, your sense of identity that you hold on to. That's the now. But there's often another version of your life that lives in your dreams, something that you think about a lot, whether it's in terms of goals or desires, or maybe it's just daydreaming, or maybe something you want that's different for yourself. But there's a version of your life out there that feels more like you, more authentic to you, more exciting to you, more fulfilled. And there's a space between these two versions of your life, the current reality and the dream. And that's the gap to close. We want to close the gap between those two versions of yourselves. There's just a space there. And the distance between those two versions can vary from person to person, but that's a lot of times what creates a sense of struggle for us, is that distance. We can think about the gap to close in another way also. First, it's the gap between the two versions of our life, the one that we currently live in and the one that we dream about, like we just talked about. We can also think about the gap to close as the space between who we are on the inside, how we feel, how we act, how we talk, how we think, our true inner self, and who it is that we present to the outside world, who it is that we show to everybody, sort of that outer self. And I know many of you can relate to this idea, the idea that we show up in the world in a certain way, but we feel differently on the inside. Have you ever felt that? I absolutely have. That we aren't totally being ourselves, that we perform in a lot of ways when we're out and about. That is also a version of the gap to close. We want to shrink that space between who we are on the inside and who we are on the outside so that we can feel like the most authentic version of ourselves consistently, on a consistent basis. And a lot of times I'll ask clients, I'll say, hey, describe your current reality and then describe to me what you would like your life to look like. And truthfully, some people don't feel like there's a huge gap between those two versions. And in that case, maybe they don't feel a lot of struggle. Maybe they aren't in dire need of coaching in that specific area. Maybe they just need to tweak a few things or dig in a little bit more or take a little bit more action. But I would say, truthfully, team, the majority of people that I talk to, there's a pretty big gap between those two versions. And that is what contributes to a sense of struggle for so many people. So the task becomes to help close the gap, shrink the space between the two versions of yourself or your life so that you can really be living in a way that feels authentic to you. Now, I said this before, but the motivating factor behind everything that we do, every achievement we want to accomplish in our life, it's to experience a certain feeling. We know this. Humans are intrinsically motivated by feelings. And this is true even when we're daydreaming about what we'd like our life to feel like. It's all for the feeling that we want to experience. And the common feelings that we always talk about are joy and peace and ease and freedom and excitement. You could probably add your own words, adventure or opportunity. We want the chance to grow. We don't like stagnation or stuckness as humans. We want evolution and progression. And knowing this, it really does make sense that so many people feel like this gap, this distance between their two versions is a major pain point. So the next logical question is, okay, how do we close the gap? How do we shorten that space between those two versions of our life or ourselves? Before we go there, we have to know what lives in the space of that gap. What exists there? What keeps people from shifting from their current reality to the reality of the life that they really desire? So let's dig into that for a second here. First, what lives in that space are the beliefs that we have about ourselves. So this might be identity, how we identify the world. Am I a wife? Am I a daughter? Am I a mother? Am I a business owner? It would include our limiting beliefs. So the things that we believe to be true about ourselves that are negative or limit us from reaching our potential or doing things that are outside of the norm. Our saboteur voices are here. Those like little negative voices that we hear in our minds, they live in this space. And also the perspectives that we have about the world. Do I think that this world is a safe place? Is the universe working for me or against me? You might have ideas about spirituality that live here. So all of this is about what we believe about ourselves and about the world. Secondly, our programming lives in this space. And what I mean by that is the way that we show up and behave based on our lived experiences, like education, parenting, religion, maybe where we grew up. It could be societal or cultural norms, maybe traditions, rituals, family expectations. They all live in the gap as well. It could include the language of our life. You've heard me talk about that before. So how we talk about ourselves, our relationships, our body, our job, our circumstances, that's the language of your life. That all lives there too. Third, there are a lot of feelings that live in the gap. And these could be negative or positive emotions. They might have to do with our sense of self-esteem or self-confidence, feelings about what we deserve in life or what we desire, what we're allowed to desire. And that might include shame or guilt, anger, fear. A lot of these feelings, these negative emotions that hold us back from showing up as our true selves, or maybe even just taking action to change our circumstances. All of those feelings live in that space as well. And then I might add, finally, there's a sense of clarity or lack of clarity. So confusion can live in this space. People often ask themselves, what is it that I really want? Who am I really? What do I value? What kind of action do I want to take? People get confused about what it is that they actually want in their life. And they often talk about not knowing what steps to take to be able to get to that place. So getting more clarity is very helpful to be able to start to close the distance, close the space between the two versions of self or life that we're thinking of. And I'm sure as you're listening to this, you can think of examples in your own life about your own gaps to close. I know for me, I can give you a very quick example. When I was in my late 20s, I had a huge gap to close in my life. And it was pertaining to who I was on the inside versus how I was presenting myself to the outside. It very much affected how I showed up in the world. And it was the fact that I needed to come out to my friends and family. I needed to be honest about my sexuality. You've heard me tell this story before. But it became so clear that because I was keeping this huge secret about myself and not being honest in my relationships, any relationship for that matter, the person that I was on the inside was starkly different than the person I was on the outside. I mean, very different. And because that gap was so big, it had a major impact on my happiness and my fulfillment. I mean, hell, it actually affected every part of my life, down to my performance at work and my ability to like make shit happen in my life. I had this version of my life that was the dream, the version that I really wanted to be living. But the version that I actually was living, my current circumstances, looked so dramatically different. And that was a huge lesson to me that these two things often go hand in hand. If you want a different version of your life, one that is the dream version with different circumstances and achievements and accomplishments and just a totally different reality, you also have to address what's going on inside of you. You have to make sure that the inside version of you, your inner self, matches the outer self, what you're presenting to the world. And what I was running into is because I wasn't doing that, I wasn't closing the gap between my inner and outer self, my life wasn't changing, and I wasn't getting any closer to that dream version of my life that I really held so tightly. There was a huge space there. Another example, this became really apparent to a recent client of mine as well. On the outside, this dude, so successful, charismatic, high achieving person who had kind of a dream life on paper, if you were to look at it. He was married, he had a successful business, he had kids, he had a great house. On paper, it looked great. But on the inside, he was angry and resentful and would describe himself as very rarely feeling any joy in his life. He was so uncomfortable and so unfulfilled in his day-to-day, he was almost desperate. And some people think, well, how can that happen? Maybe he's just not grateful, or maybe he doesn't recognize how good he has it and he needs a perspective check. I've heard people talk like that before. And here's the thing, all of that could be true, but what really shifted things in this guy's life is when he started to close the gap between who he was on the inside and who he was on the outside. It wasn't just having more gratitude. It was about dealing with all the stuff, all the crap that was living in the gap, dealing with the anger, recognizing the feelings, identifying the limiting beliefs and the saboteurs that he was hearing in his head. It was learning how to think differently, but also how to speak differently, take care of himself differently, because he was actually really burned out. And that was having a huge impact on his health and his mindset. So the big takeaway for him was the fact that he couldn't get to the dream version of his life without first closing the gap between his inner and outer self. It's a really similar takeaway to what I discovered in my own life. So here's a challenge for you. We always do a challenge at the end of every podcast, so here it is. Ask yourself, what kind of gap exists between who you are on the inside and who you present yourself to be on the outside? Just think about it. Maybe write about it. And then you can also ask, what kind of gap exists between my current reality and the reality that I dream of living? You know, am I doing the things that feel purposeful to me? Am I feeling a sense of aliveness and joy? Are there big goals or desires that I'm not pursuing or that I need to pursue? It's just a great start to understanding how big of a gap to close there is in your world. And it can be a jumping off point to start to tackle that. Okay, so that's it for today, the gap to close. I hope you are having your own insights here. I hope that you have an awesome week in the coming days. If you have questions or topics you'd like to hear more about, just shoot me an email at steph@stephsaffer.com. And until next time, thanks for being here. And thank you for being ready to impact. Thanks for listening to Impact Ready. I hope today's episode inspired you to own your impact and recognize that you are powerful. By elevating our energy and awareness, we can create exponential change in this life. If you enjoyed today's insights, share them with a friend and subscribe to the show for more. I truly appreciate you. Thanks again for being here.